Late at night, the small town of Willow Creek became even quieter. Most houses had already turned off their lights. The streets were empty. Street lamps stood along the road, giving off a soft yellow glow. The light gently touched the sidewalks and the wet ground from the earlier rain. Inside his house, Thomas Walker was asleep. His room was calm and dark. The window beside his bed was slightly open, letting in a cool night breeze. Outside, the big oak tree moved slowly. Its leaves made a soft whispering sound in the wind. Somewhere far away, a train passed slowly through the countryside. Its distant sound was long and calm. Ooh. Then silence returned again. An owl sat on one of the oak tree branches for a few minutes. It looked around quietly. Then it flew away into the dark sky. Inside the house, the clock continued its slow rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. The night moved forward quietly, and the peaceful town slept deeply under the stars. Many hours later, the sky slowly began to change. The deep dark blue of the night slowly turned into a soft gray color. Morning was slowly arriving. The streets of Willow Creek were still empty. A light mist covered the grass and sidewalks. The air was cool and calm. Inside his bedroom, Thomas was still asleep. His breathing was slow and steady. Outside the window, the first birds of the morning began to sing softly. Chirp, chirp. The sun had not fully risen yet, but a gentle light began to appear on the horizon. The leaves of the oak tree were covered with tiny drops of morning dew. Everything looked peaceful and still. Soon the town would slowly wake up again. But for now, Willow Creek remained quiet. A calm moment between night and morning. A moment of perfect silence. And the slow story of Thomas Walker continued gently into another peaceful day. As the early morning silence continued, the sky above Willow Creek slowly began to brighten. The soft gray color in the sky slowly changed to light pink and orange. The sun was rising very slowly behind the tall trees. Its warm light gently touched the roofs of the houses and the quiet streets. Birds began to sing a little louder now. Chirp, chirp, chirp. A light breeze moved through the town. The leaves of the big oak tree outside Thomas Walker's house gently rustled in the wind. Inside the bedroom, Thomas was still asleep under his warm blanket. The room was peaceful. A thin line of sunlight slowly moved across the floor and climbed onto the wall. The clock on the wall continued its slow and steady ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Everything in Willow Creek was calm and quiet. The new day had started, but it was moving very slowly. Just the way this peaceful town liked it. After some time, Thomas Walker slowly began to wake up. He did not wake up quickly. Instead, he turned slightly under his blanket and opened his eyes very slowly. The morning light was now shining softly through the window. Thomas looked at the ceiling for a moment. He listened carefully. The birds were singing outside. Somewhere down the street, a car engine started quietly. But the town was still mostly silent. Thomas sat up slowly in his bed. He stretched his arms and took a long, calm breath. Then he stood up and walked toward the window. Outside, the yard looked peaceful. The grass was still wet with morning dew. The big oak tree stood proudly in the middle of the yard, its leaves glowing softly in the sunlight. Thomas smiled quietly. It looked like another calm day in Willow Creek. No rush, no loud noise, just another slow and peaceful morning beginning in the quiet little town. Warm sunlight slowly filled the quiet bedroom of Thomas Walker. Outside the window, the tall oak tree gently moved in the soft morning wind. The leaves made a peaceful rustling sound that felt very relaxing. Thomas stood by the window for a few moments. He looked at the calm street outside his house. The town of Willow Creek was slowly waking up. A man across the street opened his mailbox. A small dog walked beside its owner down the sidewalk. A bicycle slowly passed by. Everything moved at a calm and comfortable pace. Thomas liked mornings like this. He slowly walked to the kitchen to begin his simple morning routine. The kitchen was quiet and clean. First, he filled the kettle with water and placed it on the stove. Then he opened the cupboard and took out his favorite mug. It was a plain white mug with a small blue line around the top. Thomas had been using this mug for many years. While the water slowly heated, Thomas stood by the kitchen window. The sunlight was now shining gently across the yard. Tiny drops of morning dew sparkled on the grass. The big oak tree stood proudly in the center of the yard, casting a soft shadow on the ground. Soon the kettle began to make a soft sound. The water was ready. Thomas slowly poured the hot water into his mug and made a warm cup of tea. Then he toasted 2 slices of bread. He sat down at the small wooden table and began his quiet breakfast. 1 bite, 1 sip of tea. Everything was slow and peaceful. The clock on the wall ticked gently in the background. Tick, tick, tick. Another calm day in Willow Creek had begun. After breakfast, Thomas decided to go for a longer walk than usual. He put on his light jacket and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sky was clear and bright. The streets of Willow Creek were still very calm. Thomas began walking down the sidewalk slowly. He passed several small houses. Each house looked simple and peaceful. Some people were watering their plants. Some were reading newspapers on their porches. But nobody was in a hurry. Thomas walked toward the small park at the end of the street. The park looked beautiful in the morning sunlight. The grass was fresh and green. Tall trees stood quietly around the walking path. Thomas walked along the narrow path that curved through the park. His footsteps were soft against the ground. A few birds flew from tree to tree above him. Some squirrels ran quickly across the grass. Thomas eventually reached his favorite bench. It was an old wooden bench under a tall maple tree. He sat down slowly. For a long time, he simply watched the quiet park. A gentle breeze moved through the leaves. The sunlight filtered through the branches. Everything felt calm. Nothing exciting happened, and that peaceful quiet made the morning feel very relaxing. After resting in the park for a while, Thomas continued his slow walk. Soon he reached a small building made of red bricks. It was the Willow Creek Library. Thomas liked this place very much. The library was never crowded. It was always quiet and peaceful. He opened the door slowly. A small bell rang softly as he entered. Inside, the library smelled like old books and polished wood. Tall shelves filled with books stood neatly across the room. A friendly librarian named Mr. Howard sat behind the desk. He looked up and smiled when he saw Thomas. "Good morning, Thomas," he said quietly. Thomas nodded politely. "Good morning." Thomas walked slowly between the shelves. He looked at many different books. Some were about history. Some were about nature. Some were old storybooks. After a few minutes, he picked a simple book about peaceful countryside landscapes. He liked books that were calm and slow, just like his life in Willow Creek. Thomas carried the book to a small reading table near the window. He sat down and opened the first page. Outside the window, the quiet town continued its slow day. Inside the library, everything was silent and comfortable. Page by page, Thomas began reading slowly. The peaceful story continued, just like the calm life of Willow Creek. Thomas Walker sat quietly at the small wooden table near the window of the Willow Creek Library. The library was very calm. Only the soft sound of turning pages could sometimes be heard. Sunlight slowly entered through the tall windows and rested gently on the wooden floor. Thomas opened the book he had chosen. The book talked about peaceful countryside landscapes, quiet rivers, and wide open fields. It was not an exciting book. but Thomas liked it that way. He slowly read the first page, then the second page, then the third. Every few minutes he paused and looked outside the window. Outside, the street was calm. A man slowly walked past the library with a small brown dog. A light breeze moved the leaves of the nearby trees. Inside the library, the old clock on the wall ticked slowly. Tick, tick. Mr. Howard, the librarian, quietly organized a few books behind the desk. No one spoke loudly. No one rushed. Everything felt calm and slow. Thomas spent a long time reading his book. The peaceful words and quiet room made the morning feel very relaxing. After reading for a long while, Thomas closed the book and stood up slowly. He thanked Mr. Howard and walked out into the calm morning. Howard had walked outside the library. The sun was now high in the sky. The air felt warm and comfortable. Willow Creek looked even more peaceful in the midday sunlight. Thomas began walking slowly down the street again. He passed a small bakery. From inside, the warm smell of fresh bread drifted into the air. The smell was soft and pleasant. A few people walked calmly along the sidewalks. Some sat on benches, enjoying the warm sunshine. Thomas continued walking without any hurry. Eventually, he reached a quiet corner of the town where a few tall trees stood beside the road. The leaves created gentle shadows on the ground. Thomas stopped there for a moment. He took a deep breath of the fresh air. Birds were singing softly above him. The warm sun felt relaxing on his face. It was the kind of slow and peaceful midday that made Willow Creek such a comfortable place to live. After his long walk through town, Thomas finally returned to his house. The wooden gate opened with a small creaking sound. His yard looked calm and quiet as always. The big oak tree stood in the center, giving a cool patch of shade. Thomas stepped inside his house and walked into the kitchen. It was time for lunch. Thomas did not like complicated meals. He preferred simple food. He opened the refrigerator and took out some vegetables, bread, and a small bowl of soup from the day before. Soon the kitchen filled with the warm smell of food heating on the stove. Thomas slowly prepared a small and simple lunch. The clock on the wall continued its quiet ticking. Tick, tick, tick. He carried the bowl of warm soup to the small table near the window. Outside, the afternoon sunlight gently touched the yard. The leaves of the oak tree moved slowly in the breeze. Thomas began eating his lunch, one spoon at a time. Slowly, calmly. The quiet house felt comfortable and peaceful. Another slow part of the day had arrived in Willow Creek. Nothing exciting happened. And that was exactly how Thomas liked it. After finishing his simple lunch, Thomas Walker washed his bowl and placed it neatly in the kitchen cabinet. The house was very quiet. Outside the window, the afternoon sun shined softly across the yard. Thomas decided to spend some time outside. He opened the back door and stepped into the peaceful yard. The big oak tree stood tall in the middle of the grass. Its wide branches created a cool shadow on the ground. Thomas placed a wooden chair under the tree and slowly sat down. The air was warm but comfortable. A gentle breeze moved through the leaves above him. Rustle, rustle. The sound was calm and relaxing. Thomas leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes for a moment. He listened to the quiet sounds of the afternoon. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed softly. A bird landed on one of the branches of the oak tree. It chirped a few times before flying away again. Clouds moved slowly across the bright blue sky. Time passed quietly. Thomas enjoyed these peaceful moments very much. In Willow Creek, afternoons were never busy. They were slow, calm, and perfect for resting. While Thomas was sitting under the oak tree, someone slowly walked past the wooden fence. It was his neighbor, Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins was an older man who lived in the yellow house next door. He liked taking short walks every afternoon. When he saw Thomas in the yard, he smiled and stopped near the fence. "Good afternoon, Thomas," he said calmly. Thomas opened his eyes and smiled politely. "Good afternoon, Mr. Collins." They talked quietly for a few minutes. Their conversation was simple. They talked about the warm weather. They talked about the light rain that had fallen the day before. Mr. Collins mentioned that the flowers in his garden were growing very well this year. Thomas nodded and listened. Neither of them spoke very loudly. In Willow Creek, people liked calm conversations. After a few minutes, Collins waved goodbye and continued his slow walk down the street. Thomas remained sitting under the oak tree. The afternoon continued peacefully. The wind moved softly through the branches above him. Everything felt calm and sleepy. Slowly, the bright afternoon began to fade. The sun moved lower in the sky. The warm, golden light of evening spread across the town. Thomas stood up from his chair and stretched his arms slowly. The yard looked beautiful in the soft evening light. Long shadows from the oak tree stretched across the grass. Thomas walked to the wooden fence and looked down the quiet street. A few people were returning home after their day. Some lights began turning on inside the houses. The sky slowly changed colors. Blue turned to orange. Orange slowly turned to pink. The peaceful town of Willow Creek looked calm and relaxed. Thomas took a slow walk around his yard before heading back inside. Soon it would be time for dinner, and after dinner, another quiet night would slowly arrive. The gentle rhythm of life in Willow Creek continued. Slow, peaceful, and perfect for a long, relaxing sleep. As the evening light slowly faded, Thomas Walker stepped back into his quiet house. The warm, golden sunlight came through the kitchen window and gently touched the wooden table. The house was peaceful. Thomas walked slowly to the kitchen counter and began preparing his dinner. He did not cook anything complicated. Thomas always preferred simple meals that were easy to make. He opened the refrigerator and took out a few vegetables, a small piece of bread, and some soup that he had saved earlier. First, he placed a small pot on the stove. Then he poured the soup into the pot and turned on the heat. While the soup slowly warmed, Thomas sliced the vegetables carefully. The quiet kitchen filled with the soft sounds of cooking. The clock on the wall continued its steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Outside the window, the evening sky slowly became darker. The sun was now almost gone behind the trees. Street lights along the road began to turn on one by one. Their soft yellow light gently touched the quiet street. Soon the soup was warm and ready. Thomas poured it into a bowl and sat down at the table. He ate slowly, enjoying the warm and simple meal. The calm evening made everything feel comfortable and relaxed. After finishing his dinner, Thomas washed the dishes and placed them neatly in the cabinet. Then he walked to the front door and stepped outside onto the porch. The evening air felt cool and fresh. The sky above Willow Creek was now deep blue, slowly turning darker as night approached. Thomas sat down on his wooden chair on the porch. This was one of his favorite parts of the day. The town was becoming very quiet again. A few cars passed slowly along the road. Their headlights moved softly across the houses. A gentle wind moved through the trees along the street. The leaves rustled quietly. Rustle, rustle. Thomas leaned back in his chair and looked up at the sky. The first stars were beginning to appear. They were small but bright against the darkening sky. The peaceful silence of the town made the moment feel very calm. Thomas slowly took a deep breath of the cool night air. Another quiet night in Willow Creek was beginning. The sky continued growing darker. More and more stars appeared above the quiet town. Thomas remained sitting on his porch, watching the peaceful night sky. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once. Then everything became silent again. The houses along the street had warm lights glowing inside their windows. Families were finishing dinner. Some people were watching television. Others were reading books before going to bed. But outside, The street remained calm and empty. The big oak tree in Thomas's yard moved gently in the night breeze. Its leaves whispered softly. Thomas stayed on the porch for a long time, simply enjoying the quiet night. Finally, he stood up slowly and stretched his arms. The day had been long and peaceful. Soon it would be time to rest again. Thomas walked inside his house and turned off most of the lights. The calm story of Willow Creek continued into another quiet night. After coming inside from the porch, Thomas Walker slowly closed the front door of his house. The quiet night air stayed outside, and the small house became warm and peaceful. Only a few lights were still on. Thomas walked calmly through the living room. The room was simple but comfortable. There was a soft chair near the window, a small wooden table, and a tall lamp beside it. Thomas liked to spend a little time here before going to bed. He turned on the lamp, and a warm yellow light filled the room. Outside the window, the street looked very quiet. A streetlight stood near the corner of the road, shining softly onto the empty sidewalk. Thomas picked up a small book from the table. It was the same peaceful book he had borrowed earlier from the Willow Creek Library. He sat in the chair and opened the book. Page by page, he read slowly. Sometimes he paused and looked outside the window. The big oak tree in his yard moved gently in the wind. Its shadow slowly moved across the grass. Inside the house, the clock on the wall continued its slow and steady ticking. Tick, tick, tick. The calm night wrapped around the quiet house like a soft blanket. Thomas continued reading for a while longer, enjoying the peaceful silence. Thomas gently closed the book. The room had become very quiet. It was now late at night in Willow Creek. Most houses along the street had already turned off their lights. The town looked almost completely asleep. Thomas stood up from his chair and stretched his arms slowly. He turned off the lamp, and the living room became dark. Only the soft light from the street lamp outside entered through the window. Thomas walked slowly down the hallway toward his bedroom. His footsteps were soft on the wooden floor. The house felt calm and peaceful. Outside, the wind continued to move gently through the leaves of the oak tree. A few clouds slowly passed across the sky, covering and uncovering the stars. The quiet night seemed endless and relaxing. Thomas opened the bedroom door and stepped inside. The room was cool and comfortable. Everything was ready for a peaceful night of sleep. Thomas Walker walked toward his bed and pulled back the blanket. The bed looked soft and inviting. He turned off the bedside lamp. The room became dark and quiet. Outside the window, the night continued peacefully. Thomas lay down and pulled the warm blanket over himself. For a few moments, he simply listened. The quiet wind outside, the gentle movement of tree leaves, the slow ticking of the clock somewhere in the house. Tick, tick, tick. Thomas closed his eyes. His breathing became calm and slow. Soon he began to drift into sleep. The quiet town of Willow Creek rested peacefully under the stars. Nothing exciting happened. Only silence, only calm, only the slow passing of time in the peaceful night. And the long, relaxing story continued gently into the next part of the night. Late into the night, Willow Creek became even quieter. Most lights in the houses were turned off. The streets were empty. Only the soft glow of street lamps lit the sidewalks and the quiet road. Inside his small house, Thomas Walker was sleeping peacefully. His bedroom was dark, except for a faint silver light coming through the window. That light came from the moon. The moon was high in the sky, shining gently over the town. Outside, the big oak tree stood still for a moment. Then a soft wind came and moved its branches slowly. The leaves made a quiet whispering sound. Inside the house, everything was calm. The clock continued its slow rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. The peaceful night seemed long and comfortable. Nothing disturbed the quiet town. Even the animals in the area were resting. The hours of the night slowly passed. calm, silent, peaceful. As the night slowly moved forward, the air became cooler. A gentle breeze moved through Willow Creek. It passed through the streets, across the rooftops, and through the branches of the tall trees. The breeze reached Thomas's window. The curtain moved softly for a moment. Inside the room, Thomas continued sleeping deeply. His breathing was calm and steady. Outside, the moon slowly moved across the sky. Clouds drifted quietly above the town. Far away in the countryside, a soft sound of a train horn echoed through the night. It was distant and peaceful. Then silence returned again. The town remained asleep. The slow rhythm of night continued. Every minute passed quietly. Every moment felt calm and relaxing. After many quiet hours, something slowly began to change. The dark sky above Willow Creek started to grow lighter. The deep blue of night slowly turned into soft shades of gray. Morning was slowly arriving again. The moon faded as the first hint of sunrise appeared on the horizon. A cool mist rested gently over the grass and sidewalks. The streets were still empty, but the silence felt different now. It was the calm silence that comes just before a new day begins. Inside the house, Thomas Walker was still asleep in his comfortable bed. The first soft light of morning slowly entered through the window. It touched the wall, then the floor. Soon it would reach the bed as the sun continued rising. Outside, the first birds of the morning began to sing quietly. Chirp, chirp. The peaceful town of Willow Creek was about to wake up again. Another slow day was beginning, and the long, relaxing story continued gently forward. The sky above Willow Creek slowly became brighter. Soft colors of pink and light orange spread across the horizon as the sun began to rise. The quiet streets of the town were still empty. Morning light gently touched the rooftops of the houses. The windows reflected the warm glow of the sunrise. Birds were now singing a little louder than before. Their soft chirping filled the calm morning air. Chirp, chirp, chirp. Outside Thomas Walker's house, the big oak tree stood quietly. Tiny drops of dew rested on the green grass below it. The morning breeze moved slowly through the branches. Inside the house, everything was still very peaceful. Thomas was still asleep in his bed. The sunlight slowly moved across the floor of his bedroom. Minute by minute, the light grew brighter. The quiet town was slowly waking up, but everything still moved at a calm and gentle pace. After some time, Thomas Walker slowly opened his eyes. The soft morning sunlight filled his bedroom. For a few moments, he simply lay in bed, listening to the peaceful sounds outside. Birds were singing. A light breeze moved the leaves of the oak tree. Somewhere down the street, a car door quietly closed. Thomas sat up slowly. He stretched his arms and took a deep breath. The fresh morning air felt nice. He walked to the window and looked outside. The yard looked beautiful in the morning light. The grass sparkled with tiny drops of dew. The oak tree looked tall and calm, just like every morning. Thomas smiled quietly. It looked like another peaceful day in Willow Creek. Thomas slowly walked to the kitchen to begin his morning routine. The kitchen was quiet and comfortable. Sunlight came through the window and rested gently on the wooden table. Thomas filled the kettle with water and placed it on the stove. Soon the kettle began heating slowly. While waiting, Thomas opened the window slightly. Cool morning air entered the kitchen. Outside, the quiet town was slowly coming to life. A few people walked along the sidewalks. Someone watered the plants in their front yard. The peaceful rhythm of the morning continued. Soon the kettle was ready. Thomas poured the hot water into his favorite mug and made a warm cup of tea. Then he toasted 2 slices of bread. He sat at the small wooden table and enjoyed his simple breakfast. 1 bite, 1 sip of tea. Everything felt calm and slow. Another peaceful day had begun in the quiet town of Willow Creek, and the long, relaxing story continued gently forward. The kitchen of Thomas Walker's house was filled with soft morning light. Thomas sat quietly at the wooden table with his cup of warm tea. Outside the window, the peaceful town of Willow Creek was slowly waking up. Was bright blue now. A few white clouds moved slowly across it. Thomas took a slow sip of tea. The warmth of the drink felt relaxing. He looked out the window while eating his toast. Across the street, a neighbor slowly walked to their mailbox. A small brown dog followed its owner down the sidewalk. Everything moved at a calm and comfortable pace. Inside the kitchen, the wall clock continued its steady ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Thomas finished his breakfast slowly. He enjoyed these quiet mornings very much. There was no hurry, no loud noise, just calm moments beginning another peaceful day. After finishing breakfast, Thomas put on his light jacket and stepped outside. The fresh morning air felt cool and clean. The street looked calm as always. Tall trees stood along both sides of the road. Their leaves moved gently in the breeze. Thomas began walking slowly down the sidewalk. His footsteps were quiet. He passed several small houses with colorful gardens. Some people were watering plants. Some were sitting on their porches reading newspapers. Thomas nodded politely as he walked by. Soon he reached the small park at the corner of the street. The grass looked bright green in the sunlight. A few birds flew from tree to tree. The park bench under the maple tree was empty. Thomas sat down there for a moment. He watched the calm morning around him. The wind moved softly through the branches above. The peaceful feeling of the park made everything seem slow and relaxing. After resting in the park for a while, Thomas stood up and continued walking. The town was a little more active now, but still very quiet. A bicycle slowly passed along the road. The small bakery near the corner opened its doors. The smell of fresh bread drifted gently through air. Thomas walked past the bakery and continued down the street. The sunlight was warm, but comfortable. Everything in Willow Creek moved slowly and peacefully. Thomas enjoyed these simple moments very much. He was never in a hurry. Life in this small town was calm, very calm, and that was exactly how he liked it. The long and relaxing story continued slowly. As Thomas Walker continued his slow walk through Willow Creek, he passed the small bakery again. The door was open now. Warm air and the gentle smell of fresh bread floated out onto the street. Thomas stopped for a moment near the door. The smell was calm and comforting. He decided to step inside. A small bell above the door rang softly as he entered. Inside the bakery, everything felt warm and peaceful. Fresh loaves of bread rested on wooden shelves. Behind the counter stood a friendly baker named Mrs. Dalton. She smiled kindly when she saw Thomas. "Good morning, Thomas," she said in a calm voice. Thomas nodded politely. "Good morning." He bought a small loaf of bread. Nothing fancy, just a simple loaf. Dalton placed it in a small paper bag and handed it to him. Thomas thanked her and slowly walked back outside. The quiet town street welcomed him again. The sun was shining gently, and the peaceful morning continued. With the small bag of bread in his hand, Thomas began walking back toward his house. The sidewalks were still calm and uncrowded. A soft wind moved through the trees. Their leaves made a quiet rustling sound. Rustle, rustle. Thomas walked slowly past the park again. A few people were now sitting on the benches, enjoying the warm sunlight. A child rode a bicycle slowly along the path. But even with a few people around, the park remained peaceful. Thomas continued down the quiet street until he reached his wooden gate. He opened it gently and stepped into his yard. The big oak tree welcomed him with its wide branches and cool shade. Thomas looked around the calm yard for a moment. Then he walked inside the house. Inside the house, everything was just as calm as before. The living room was filled with soft sunlight. Thomas placed the bag of bread on the kitchen table. He poured himself another small cup of tea. Then he carried the tea into the living room. He sat down in his comfortable chair near the window. Outside, the oak tree leaves moved slowly in the wind. The quiet street looked peaceful, as always. Thomas took a slow sip of tea. The warmth felt relaxing. On the small table beside him was the book he borrowed from the Willow Creek Library. He picked it up and opened it again. Page by page, he continued reading slowly. Sometimes he paused and looked out the window. Sometimes he simply listened to the quiet ticking of the clock. Tick, tick. The late morning passed gently in. The peaceful house. Nothing exciting happened, and that made the moment feel even more calm. The long, relaxing story of Willow Creek continued slowly forward. Late mornings slowly turned into noon in the peaceful town of Willow Creek. The sun moved higher in the sky, and bright light filled the small houses and quiet streets. Inside his living room, Thomas Walker continued reading his book. The house was very calm. Only the gentle ticking of the wall clock could be heard. Tick, tick, tick. After reading several pages, Thomas slowly closed the book and placed it on the small table. He stood up and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the yard looked bright and peaceful. The big oak tree stood tall in the warm sunlight. Its shadow stretched across the grass. A light breeze moved through the leaves. Rustle, rustle. Thomas opened the window slightly. Fresh air entered the kitchen. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower hummed quietly. The slow rhythm of noon in Willow Creek continued calmly. After standing by the window for a while, Thomas decided it was time to prepare lunch. He walked slowly to the refrigerator and opened the door. Inside were a few simple ingredients: some vegetables, a bowl of soup, and the loaf of bread he had bought from the bakery earlier. Thomas placed the vegetables on the kitchen counter and began slicing them slowly. The kitchen filled with quiet sounds. The knife gently tapped against the wooden cutting board. Tap, tap, tap. Soon he placed a small pot on the stove and warmed the soup again. The warm smell slowly filled the kitchen. Outside the window, the sunlight shined softly across the yard. Everything felt calm and peaceful. Into a bowl and placed a slice of fresh bread beside it. Then he carried his simple lunch to the small wooden table. He sat down and began eating slowly. One spoon of soup, one small bite of bread. The quiet house made the meal feel relaxing. After finishing lunch, Thomas washed his bowl and placed it neatly in the cabinet. The sun was still bright outside, but the afternoon had begun. Thomas stepped outside into the yard again. The warm air felt comfortable. He placed his wooden chair under the shade of the oak tree. Then he sat down slowly. The shade from the tree made the air feel cooler. Thomas leaned back and looked up through the branches. The leaves moved gently in the wind. Sunlight passed through the leaves and created soft patterns on the grass. Clouds drifted slowly across the blue sky. Everything felt calm and sleepy. Thomas closed his eyes for a few minutes and listened to the quiet afternoon sounds. A bird chirped nearby. A distant car passed down the street. Then silence returned again. The peaceful afternoon in Willow Creek continued slowly. Another calm chapter of the long, relaxing story moved gently forward. Thomas Walker remained sitting quietly under the shade of the big oak tree. The afternoon sun was bright, but the wide branches of the tree kept the yard cool and comfortable. A gentle breeze passed through the leaves. Rustle, rustle. The sound was soft and relaxing. Thomas leaned back in his wooden chair and looked up at the sky through the branches. Small patches of blue sky appeared between the green leaves. Clouds moved slowly across the sky. Everything seemed to move at a very calm pace. A Across the street, a neighbor slowly watered the plants in their garden. The water made a quiet splashing sound on the soil. A small bird landed on the fence near Thomas's yard. It chirped a few times and then flew away again. The peaceful afternoon continued. Nothing exciting happened, just quiet moments passing gently under the warm sun. After resting for a while, Thomas slowly stood up from the chair. He stretched his arms and looked around his yard. The grass looked bright green in the afternoon light. Thomas decided to take a small walk around the yard. He walked slowly along the wooden fence. The fence was old but strong. Some small flowers were growing near the edge of the yard. Their colors looked soft and pleasant. Thomas stopped near the oak tree and gently touched the rough bark of the trunk. This tree had been here for many years. It had seen many seasons come and go. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. The tree stood strong through them all. Thomas smiled quietly and continued his slow walk across the yard. Everything around him felt calm and familiar. The afternoon sun began to move slowly across the sky. A warm breeze passed through the town of Willow Creek. The breeze moved across the streets, through the trees, and over the rooftops. In Thomas's yard, the breeze gently moved the leaves of the oak tree again. The shadows on the grass slowly changed shape. Thomas returned to his wooden chair and sat down again. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened carefully. The quiet sounds of the afternoon surrounded him. A distant car engine, a bird singing in the tree, the soft wind moving through the leaves. Everything felt peaceful and sleepy. Time moved slowly in Willow Creek, and the long, relaxing story continued gently into the next part of the afternoon. After spending a long, peaceful time in the yard, Thomas Walker slowly stood up from the wooden chair. The afternoon sun was still warm, but it had begun to move lower in the sky. Long shadows from the oak trees stretched across the grass. Thomas walked slowly toward the wooden gate at the front of his yard. Near the gate stood his small gray mailbox. He opened the gate and stepped onto the quiet sidewalk. The street looked calm as always. Only a gentle wind moved through the tall trees along the road. Thomas opened the mailbox slowly. Inside were just two pieces of mail. One was a small letter. The other was a simple newspaper. Thomas took them out and closed the mailbox again. He stood there for a moment, looking down the peaceful street. A bird flew across the sky. The afternoon continued calmly. Then Thomas turned and walked back into his yard. Inside the house, Thomas placed the letter on the kitchen table. Then he unfolded the newspaper. He carried it to the living room and sat down in his comfortable chair near the window. Outside, the oak tree moved gently in the wind. The house felt quiet and relaxed. Thomas slowly began reading the newspaper. The news was simple. There were stories about nearby towns. There was a weather report, and there were small advertisements for local shops. Thomas read each page slowly. Sometimes he paused to sip a cup of tea. Sometimes he looked outside the window. The quiet ticking of the clock filled the room. Tick, tick, tick. The peaceful afternoon passed gently while Thomas read. Nothing exciting happened, just calm and quiet moments. As time passed, the bright afternoon slowly turned into late afternoon. The sunlight outside became softer and warmer. Golden light filled the yard and touched the walls of the house. Thomas folded the newspaper and placed it neatly on the table. Outside, the big oak tree cast a long shadow across the grass. The sky was slowly changing color as the sun moved closer to the horizon. The peaceful town of Willow Creek looked calm and beautiful in the warm evening light. Thomas stepped outside again and stood in the yard. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. The leaves rustled quietly. Rustle, rustle. The day was slowly coming to an end. Soon evening would arrive again in Willow Creek, and the long, relaxing story would continue into another calm night. The warm light of late afternoon slowly spread across Thomas Walker's yard. The sun was now lower in the sky, and its golden light passed gently through the branches of the big oak tree. Thomas stood quietly in the yard for a few moments. The air felt calm and comfortable. A soft breeze moved the leaves above him. Rustle, rustle. The long shadow of the oak tree stretched across the grass. Thomas slowly walked toward the wooden chair that still sat under the tree. He sat down again and leaned back. The peaceful town of Willow Creek looked beautiful in the evening light. Across the street, a few neighbors were returning home. A car passed slowly along the quiet road, but even with small movements around the town, everything still felt calm and slow. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the relaxing sounds of the evening. A bird chirped softly. The wind moved gently through the trees. The quiet evening continued peacefully. As time passed, the sun moved even closer to the horizon. The sky above Willow Creek slowly changed colors. Bright blue faded into soft orange and pink. Clouds in the sky reflected the warm colors of the sunset. Thomas remained sitting under the oak tree. He looked up at the sky quietly. The sunset was slow and beautiful. The warm evening light touched the rooftops of the houses and the tops of the trees. The town looked peaceful and calm. Some porch lights began turning on along the street. The soft glow of the lights mixed with the fading sunlight. Thomas took a slow, deep breath. The cool evening air felt refreshing. Soon, night would arrive again in the quiet town. After watching the sunset for a long time, Thomas slowly stood up from the chair. The sky was now darker. Only a small orange line remained on the horizon. Thomas walked calmly across the yard toward the house. The oak tree leaves moved softly above him. He opened the back door and stepped inside. The house felt warm and peaceful. Thomas turned on a small lamp in the living room. A soft yellow light filled the room. Outside the window, the night sky slowly appeared. The first stars began shining above Willow Creek. Thomas walked to the kitchen and poured himself a warm cup of tea. He carried the cup to his chair near the window and sat down quietly. The peaceful night had begun once again. The long, relaxing story continued gently into another calm night in Willow Creek. Thomas Walker sat comfortably in his chair near the window. A warm cup of tea rested in his hands. The small lamp beside him gave off a soft yellow light that filled the quiet living room. Outside the window, the town of Willow Creek was becoming very peaceful again. Most houses had turned on their porch lights. A few cars passed slowly down the street. But soon, the road became quiet again. Thomas reached for the book he had borrowed from the library earlier that day. He opened it slowly. Page by page, he began reading again. The story in the book talked about quiet countryside fields and long, peaceful rivers. It was a calm book, a slow book, perfect for a quiet night. Sometimes Thomas paused his reading and looked out the window. The big oak tree in his yard moved gently in the night breeze. Its shadow stretched across the grass under the soft light of the street lamp. Inside the house, the clock continued its slow ticking. Tick, tick, tick. The peaceful rhythm of the night made everything feel calm and sleepy. After reading for a long time, Thomas gently closed the book. The night had grown deeper. The town was now very quiet. Most lights in the houses along the street had turned off. The sky above Willow Creek was dark and filled with bright stars. Thomas stood up slowly and walked to the window. He looked up at the sky for a moment. The stars looked peaceful and distant. A cool breeze moved through the branches of the oak tree. The leaves whispered softly, rustle, rustle. Thomas took a slow breath of the cool night air. The calm silence of the town made the moment feel very relaxing. It had been another peaceful day in Willow Creek. Soon it would be time to rest again. Thomas finished the last sip of his tea and placed the empty cup on the table. He turned off the lamp in the living room. The room became dim and quiet. Only the soft light from the street lamp outside came through the window. Thomas walked slowly down the hallway toward his bedroom. His footsteps were soft on the wooden floor. The house felt calm and peaceful. When he entered the bedroom, he turned on a small bedside lamp. The warm light made the room feel comfortable. Thomas pulled back the blanket on his bed. Outside the window, the oak tree moved gently in the wind. The quiet town of Willow Creek rested peacefully under the night sky. Thomas turned off the bedside lamp and lay down in the bed. The room became dark and silent. He closed his eyes slowly. His breathing became calm. Soon he began drifting into a deep, peaceful sleep. Thomas Walker lay quietly in his bed. The house around him was completely peaceful. Outside the window, the night air moved gently through the branches of the big oak tree in his yard. Rustle, rustle. The leaves whispered softly in the wind. The town of Willow Creek had fallen into deep silence. Most houses were dark now. Only a few distant streetlights glowed softly along the empty road. Inside the house, the slow ticking of the clock could still be heard. Tick, tick, tick. Thomas's breathing was calm and steady as he slept comfortably under the warm blanket. The moon slowly moved across the sky above the quiet town. Its silver light gently touched the rooftops, the sidewalks, and the tall trees. Everything looked peaceful. Nothing rushed. Nothing disturbed the quiet night. Hours passed slowly. The stars above Willow Creek shined softly in the dark sky. A cool breeze continued to move through the town. The big oak tree stood strong and calm, just as it had for many years. Inside the house, Thomas continued sleeping peacefully. Another calm day had ended, and another quiet night wrapped the small town in peaceful silence. The story of Willow Creek was simple. Slow mornings, quiet afternoons, peaceful evenings, and calm nights full of gentle silence. Nothing exciting, nothing loud, just the slow rhythm of life in a quiet little town. And as the night continued, the peaceful town of Willow Creek rested quietly under the stars. The end of the long, relaxing journey had arrived. A story made for calm minds, quiet nights, and deep, peaceful sleep. Long, relaxing story moved gently toward its final quiet moment.